Depression, friends, is a dark specter that haunts 30% of Americans during their lifetime. It's an insidious enemy. Often the drugs we arm ourselves with fall pitifully short. It was always thought that depression was a chemical imbalance, a lack of serotonin. But what if it's more a structural collapse, a citadel besieged by relentless waves of stress? And the knight in shining armor, the unexpected champion, might be ketamine. Yes, the anesthetic known for its potent effects could be the much-needed elixir. Its mechanism? Not by replenishing serotonin, but by fortifying neurons, shielding them from the onslaught of stress. It seems to work faster, more efficiently than its predecessors, with an impressive 65% of patients responding positively. But here's the real twist. Could ketamine be used preventively, like a shield against the darkness? Like a vaccine? That's the million-dollar question. And the answer? All in good time, my friends. All in good time. What's up, my amazing and curious folks? Are you ready to unravel some mysteries together? My name is Caesar, and I'm here with the vibrant and ever-reflective Sonia. Remember to subscribe to our Curiosity Wonderland, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you never miss out on our daily episodes. Are you ready, Sonia?
Absolutely, Caesar. Hi, everyone. Let's dive into today's intriguing topic.
Let's paint a picture, folks. Picture a sunny fall day at a mental hospital near the prestigious Yale University. A depressed patient is there, and into her arm flows ketamine, a drug that's about to embark on a 40-minute journey to her brain cells. Its mission? A groundbreaking one, to quell the drive towards suicide, an impulse tragically common in severe depression. Imagine if we could just switch off that impulse, how many lives could be saved? But the aspirations for ketamine don't stop there. It's also being studied as a possible vaccine against depression, and get this, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, depression is a widespread specter, casting its gloom over 30% of us Americans at some point. It's like this uninvited guest who refuses to leave the party, no matter how many hints you drop. We've tried to show it the door, armed with antidepressant drugs, but these drugs, despite their blockbuster sales and prominence in advertising, haven't proven to be the game changers we hoped for. They seem to operate under the presumption that depression is a byproduct of a chemical imbalance. So, pump in a bit more of one chemical, mop up an excess of another, and you're sorted, right? Not quite. The link between chemicals like serotonin and depression is nebulous at best. But along comes ketamine, making us rethink the whole chemical imbalance theory. What if the nature of depression is less about an imbalance and more about structural changes in our brains? What if the true villain is stress, relentlessly chipping away at our neurons, reshaping their connections, and remodeling the architecture of our brains? Imagine stress as a never-ending storm, wearing away at the roof shingles of your neurons. This is where ketamine, this unexpected hero, steps in. By bolstering the neurons against this damage, ketamine alters not just the chemistry, but the very structure of the brain. Now, typically, mental hospitals see patients when they're already at breaking point, their brains ravaged by the twin forces of vulnerable genes and severe stressors like loss or trauma. But imagine if we could change that narrative. Consider our approach to other illnesses, like heart disease or cancer. Early detection and intervention often allows us to manage these conditions effectively and prevent crises. What if we could apply the same principle to mental health, preventing mental illness before it rears its ugly head, like a vaccination for the mind? The stakes couldn't be higher, folks. Among all illnesses, neuropsychiatric diseases are believed to inflict the heaviest burden on society. So, are we on the brink of an unprecedented shift in how we understand and treat mental health? Well, time will tell. To put things into perspective, almost half of us Americans may be affected by a mental disorder during our lifetime. And the toll of these disorders is harrowing. Every year, 40,000 Americans die by suicide, a staggering 90% of whom suffered from a mental illness. These numbers exceed those of fatalities caused by murder or car crashes.
That's incredibly devastating.
It certainly is. Even more disturbing is the fact that since 2005, the suicide rate among U.S. war veterans has almost doubled. In the first half of 2012, more service members died by suicide than in combat. This is a tragic testament to the inadequacy of psychiatric treatments.
And what about the effectiveness of current treatments?
Well, it's a mixed bag. You see, less than a third of depression patients respond to a drug within 14 weeks. And even after 6 months and multiple drugs, only half of patients recover. A significant 33% don't respond to any drug at all.
So why is this? Why are the treatments we have not effective?
A big part of the reason is that we don't fully understand how these treatments work. Take serotonin, a neurotransmitter targeted by many antidepressants. We still have limited knowledge about its role in the brain. This chemical was originally found in the gut, and its connection to depression and mental health was only discovered later.
And how was this connection established?
The credit goes to Betty Twarog, a 25-year-old PhD student at Harvard. She found serotonin in neurons and challenged the prevailing notion that brain signals were purely electrical impulses. She suggested that chemicals like serotonin play a crucial role in brain signaling. Despite initial skepticism, her work, along with D.W. Woolley's observations about the similarity between LSD and serotonin, eventually led to the acceptance of the role of serotonin in the brain.
Isn't it fascinating how our understanding of mental health has evolved and continues to evolve?
Absolutely. And it's this evolution of understanding that offers the promise of better treatments and hopefully a future where mental disorders don't exact such a heavy toll on society. The discovery of serotonin's role was undoubtedly a game changer in neuroscience, but it led to a somewhat misleading belief about mental illness. The idea of a serotonin deficiency being the root cause of disorders like depression. This premise spurred the development of antidepressants like iproniazid and imipramine, initially intended to treat tuberculosis and schizophrenia respectively. Interestingly, these drugs also seem to induce a state of inappropriate happiness in some patients by elevating levels of serotonin and related neurotransmitters.
So these drugs were initially for other conditions, but ended up being used to treat depression.
Correct. And for decades, drug companies have touted the idea that mood disorders are caused by a chemical imbalance, specifically a lack of serotonin. But truth be told, the evidence supporting this theory is thin.
How did the treatment for depression evolve from there?
Well, there were two main types of antidepressants in the early days. The first was monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or MAOIs, which block an enzyme from breaking down serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. While effective, these drugs came with a hefty price, potentially deadly spikes in blood pressure if combined with certain foods like aged cheeses, beer, or cured meats. The second type was tricyclic antidepressants, which work by blocking the reabsorption of serotonin and norepinephrine. These also had a host of side effects, ranging from dry mouth to erectile dysfunction.
Sounds pretty rough.
Indeed. The next generation of drugs, known as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, arrived in the 80s. These included big names like Prozac, Zoloft, and Paxil. These drugs were more focused on serotonin and caused fewer side effects, but they weren't much more effective at lifting mood than the older drugs. It's like trying to fix a complex machine by just tweaking one part. It's not that simple.
So despite all these advancements, we're still grappling with the mystery of how to effectively treat mental disorders.
Exactly. And it's high time we challenge the assumption that a simple chemical imbalance is at the heart of mood disorders. We need to dig deeper and broaden our understanding to make real progress in treating mental health. We've been discussing serotonin a lot, but it's important to note that its role in our mental health isn't as simple as we once thought. You might remember those ads for Zoloft, a well-known antidepressant, presenting depression as an imbalance of natural chemicals in the brain, and claiming Zoloft corrects this imbalance.
Yes, the sad little blob under a gray cloud. I remember that ad.
Right. However, the evidence for this chemical imbalance theory is pretty scant. For instance, while Prozac raises serotonin levels within hours, mood changes don't kick in for weeks. Similarly, depleting serotonin in healthy people doesn't make them sad. And some studies have even found increased levels of serotonin in the brains of depressed individuals.
So if serotonin isn't the feel-good chemical we thought it was, what's going on?
It's more complicated than we initially thought. A drug like Zoloft, which is serotonin-based, might make you feel happier, but it does so in an indirect way. It's not the simplistic chemical imbalance we've been led to believe.
But if serotonin isn't the culprit, what else could be causing depression?
A more likely candidate is actually stress. Moderate stress can be motivating and good for the brain, but problems arise when stress becomes too intense or prolonged. This kind of stress can actually change the brain's architecture. Long-term stress can cause neurons in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, which are responsible for memory, mood, and impulse control, to shrink, while those in the amygdala, the area responsible for fear and anxiety, expand.
So it seems our understanding of mental health and depression is still evolving.
Indeed, and that's why it's so crucial we continue to explore and question our assumptions about mental health. Only then can we hope to develop truly effective treatments. Our response to stress isn't universal. Two people can undergo the same stressful event, but one might be more negatively affected due to different perceptions or prior life experiences.
So it's kind of like how some people love roller coasters and others are terrified by them.
Exactly. It's all about perception. The way we react to stress could be related to our stress hormones flooding parts of our brain with glutamate, a neurotransmitter that essentially acts as the brain's go signal. Glutamate is used by 80% of neurons in the cortex and is crucial to everything from our memory to our mood.
So it's not just about serotonin?
Correct. In fact, the neurotransmitters like serotonin are modulatory. They make up less than 1% of the neurons in the cortex, and they help fine-tune the brain's response. But the real heavy lifter is glutamate.
And how does stress come into play?
Well, stress hormones can drastically affect the glutamate system. They push the neuron to send out more glutamate, interfere with the recycling of glutamate, and block the receptors that would normally receive glutamate. This leads to an excess of glutamate in the brain, which can damage its structure and function.
That sounds serious.
It is, indeed. It's this overabundance of glutamate that can cause a neuron to fire prematurely, triggering a cascade of signals that can cause harm. That's why it's not just about serotonin or a simple chemical imbalance. Our brains are complex, and our understanding of mental illness needs to reflect that complexity. Overdosing on glutamate can have serious consequences on the structure of our neurons. Each neuron has tree-like branches, known as dendrites, which they use to communicate with other neurons.
So what happens when there's too much glutamate?
An excess of glutamate can be harmful. It can cause the neuron's canopy of branches to shrink, similar to a plant that's been doused with herbicide. And if the stress is prolonged, whole branches might recede.
And this process is called excitotoxicity.
That's correct. Excitotoxicity is thought to be involved in a range of mental and neurological disorders, from depression and bipolar disorder to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Chronic stress inundates neurons with glutamate and possibly contributes to mood disorders.
But I thought neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to change, was a good thing?
It usually is. Our brain's adaptability is crucial for learning and recovery from brain injuries. It enables us to relearn lost skills and even change patterns of brain activity through psychotherapy or meditation. However, this flexibility also makes our brain susceptible to negative changes caused by stress. It can lead to chronic fear or depression, particularly in people with a genetic predisposition to these disorders.
And I believe you mentioned that ketamine works on this glutamate signaling?
That's right. Ketamine works directly on glutamate signaling, which might be why it works faster and more often than traditional antidepressants. However, not everyone agrees that stress and glutamate are the root cause of depression. Some experts believe that these are downstream effects, while others point out that there may be various subtypes of depression, each with a different cause.
It's clear there's still so much to learn about our brains and mental health.
Absolutely. We are only beginning to unravel the complexities of our mind. And that's why these discussions are so important. They help us to further our understanding and hopefully lead us to more effective treatments for mental disorders. Depression isn't a unified disease, but rather a constellation of symptoms, each with different neural roots. And perhaps surprisingly, the drug ketamine has shown significant promise for treating depression.
Wait, the same ketamine that's used as an anesthetic?
Yes, indeed. Since 1962, ketamine has been a go-to anesthetic for children in emergency rooms. It's also been used recreationally, and unfortunately, it's been misused as a date rape drug. Despite this, ketamine has shown considerable antidepressant properties.
But how does it work?
Researchers at Yale discovered ketamine's antidepressant power by accident in 1999. They were using it to study glutamate's role in depression and found that ketamine made patients feel better, often within hours, and these effects tended to last for weeks.
That's quite remarkable, especially considering how many people don't respond to existing treatments.
That's right. In fact, ketamine has been effective for up to 65% of patients who didn't respond to existing treatments. For patients who are often suicidal, this fast response can indeed be life-saving. So, dear listeners, isn't it fascinating how our understanding of depression and its treatment is constantly evolving? What are your thoughts on this? Are you surprised by these discoveries? It truly goes to show how much we still have to learn about our own minds. Don't forget to share your thoughts and hit the like button if you're enjoying the content. Ketamine's use for treating depression is gaining momentum. In the United States, around 50 doctors now offer ketamine infusions for depression.
That's intriguing. But why is it considered such a big deal in the field of mood disorder treatment?
Some have called the emergence of ketamine and future fast antidepressants based on glutamate one of the most exciting developments in mood disorder treatment in the last half-century.
How does it compare to more traditional antidepressants?
Well, both ketamine and old antidepressants result in fuller neural trees, but they take different routes at different speeds. Traditional serotonin-based drugs like Prozac take 4 to 6 weeks to have an effect. A 2003 study found that these drugs only work if they spur the birth of new neurons in the hippocampus. These new neurons take about 4 to 6 weeks to mature, which is about the same amount of time it takes for these drugs to lift a depressed person's spirits. On the other hand, ketamine seems to act directly on mature neurons, encouraging them to grow branches more robustly or protecting them against damage. It blocks certain glutamate receptors, reducing the risk of the neuron shrinking or self-destructing.
It sounds promising, but is it accessible to those who need it?
That's where it gets tricky. The cost of ketamine infusions for depression can range from $500 to $3,000 per dose, and insurance doesn't usually cover the cost because, while it's FDA approved as an anesthetic, it has not been approved as an antidepressant.
That's unfortunate, so the high cost could be a barrier to its wider use.
Exactly. The current patent and approval system doesn't incentivize pharmaceutical companies to invest in a drug they can't monetize, like ketamine. While it's a promising treatment, until the system changes, it may remain out of reach for many who could potentially benefit from it. Another drug that also acts on glutamate receptors is lithium carbonate. It's one of our most reliable treatments for bipolar disorder.
But isn't lithium just an element?
Yes, it is. And because it's an element, it can't be patented. This means it doesn't attract many corporate dollars despite its effectiveness.
How about the structural changes in the brain?
That's a tough one. Brain imaging studies have shown differences between the white matter in healthy versus bipolar brains. These changes likely have genetic roots and could be difficult or impossible to reverse.
So preventing mood disorders is key?
Yes. The idea is that if a drug prevents a mood disorder from manifesting, it might prevent harmful anatomical changes from ever taking place. Ketamine given before a crisis might act like a vaccine to protect the brain against the effects of stress.
You mean it could be given just once for lasting resilience?
That's the theory. Some of the first evidence of this came from battlefield experiences. U.S. soldiers injured in Iraq were treated with various anesthetics, including ketamine. Surgeons were worried that it might make trauma worse, but it turned out those treated with ketamine had lower rates of post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's remarkable. Were similar results found in non-combat situations?
Yes. In experiments with mice, for example, those given ketamine before being exposed to stress fared far better than those who weren't. They didn't act depressed afterward. But, of course, more research is needed to fully understand these effects. Some fascinating research from neuroscientist Rebecca Brackman and her supervisor, Christine Denny, showed that the effects of a single dose of ketamine lasted for weeks in mice, even though the drug only stays in the body for just a few hours.
Does that mean the protective effects of ketamine could last even longer?
That's the hope. While it hasn't been tested yet, it's possible that the protection could last for a much longer duration, similar to a vaccine. Their research suggests that ketamine may work even better as a preventative measure than as an antidepressant.
In what situations could this be useful?
The idea is that it could be used to prevent PTSD in individuals who have experienced traumatic events. But there's a catch. Ketamine seems to be most protective when given before stressful events. Since most traumatic life events are unpredictable, this could limit the drug's utility. However, if the drug is administered after a trauma but before psychological damage sets in, it may still be protective. And in some situations, like for first responders or aid workers going into acutely traumatic situations, a preventative drug like ketamine could potentially protect their brains from the long-lasting effects of stress.
That sounds hopeful, but are there any causes for concern?
Absolutely. There are questions about ketamine's long-term safety, and its reputation as a street drug is difficult to shake. Some doctors worry about the hallucinogenic effect and fear patients might develop a taste for the high, although it's been noted that patients often find the trip feeling unpleasant or disturbing. So while this is a promising area of research, there are still many questions that need to be answered. There's work being done to develop alternatives to ketamine. Johnson & Johnson is testing a nasal spray form of esketamine, which is a version of ketamine with less psychoactive impact. Naurex, another company, has completed phase 2 trials of rapastanel, an injected drug which partially blocks the same glutamate receptors as ketamine, but isn't psychedelic.
So there are solutions on the horizon?
Yes, and it's important to note that ketamine may just be the first of many drugs in this new class of psychiatric prophylactics. Brockman and Denny emphasize that their prevention research is only the beginning of a new road, raising hopes more than offering an immediate cure.
So we're talking about a whole new way of approaching mood disorders.
Exactly. The key takeaway from this research is that we can intervene beforehand and create some sort of self-reinforcing stress resilience. It's a massive breakthrough in understanding how we can potentially manage these disorders and improve overall mental health. The specifics about what drug to use and how to use it will come later. The important thing is that this new approach is on the horizon. As we near the end of this fascinating journey, it's important to note that this research really marks a paradigm shift in the approach to mood disorders. The potential to prevent these issues, rather than simply treating symptoms as they arise, could fundamentally change how we approach mental health.
So it's fair to say that we're on the brink of a significant breakthrough.
Yes, the promise of this new approach is certainly a cause for optimism. Of course, there's still a great deal of research needed, but the initial findings point towards a hopeful future. Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best.
That sounds like a great note to wrap up on.
Indeed, it is. This has been a glimpse into the future of mental health treatment, showing us that there's hope and potentially revolutionary change on the horizon. Today, we peeled back the layers on a new approach to treating depression, one where the mysterious drug, ketamine, potentially plays a vital role as a preventative measure. It's like we've turned the tables on mental health, moving from reaction to prevention.
It has certainly been an illuminating conversation. Who knew that the answer to fighting depression might be lurking in an anesthetic drug and its ability to tackle structural changes in the brain?
It's like sticking up a shield against the onslaught of stress before ever stepping foot on the battlefield.
Absolutely. And these new strategies of prevention might just change the face of mental health care. So, to all our wonderful listeners out there, if you've enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to blast that like button, drop your comments and thoughts, and share this episode with your friends. Your support helps us continue bringing you these fascinating discussions.
Absolutely right. We're so grateful for your support. Remember, never stop being curious and keep exploring the world with us at Curiosity Wonderland.
And on that note, it's goodbye from us. Stay curious and keep tuning into Curiosity Wonderland. Stay safe and take care.
Goodbye, everyone. This enlightening information was found on the Big Think site in an article titled A Vaccine for Depression, written by Taylor Beck and published on the 6th of January, 2024. If you'd like to dive further into this subject, you can find the full URL in the video description. All right, now I'm off.